Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Janish and I am the Product Marketing Manager at AppViewX. To give you a little introduction about our company, AppViewX is revolutionizing the way NetOps and SecOps teams deliver services to enterprise IT. Our platform is a modular low-code software application that enables the automation and orchestration of network infrastructure using an intuitive, context-aware visual workflow. Our topic for today is SSL TLS Certificate Management 102, How to Manage. And this topic will be presented by Glenn Gray, our Senior Solution Architect. This webinar is the second part of our three-part webinar series. If you wish to watch the first part of this series, you can head over to www.appvux.com/resources/webinars to watch the first part on demand. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up at the end of the presentation during our Q&A. Now, without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to Glenn. Hello, Glenn.
Hi, everyone. This is Glenn Gray. Thank you, Janish. I am the Senior Solutions Architect with AppViewX for North America, and I want to thank you all for joining. I'll jump right in, and the introduction that's already been given covers the topic that we'll be presenting today. Let me just take control. So to start off with, I just kind of want to describe some of the trends that we're currently experiencing in the way of encryption management. I'm sure that a lot of companies, I know a lot of companies that I've been involved with, and perhaps even in your own corporate environment, there's a lot of difficulties and challenges that you face in managing the encryption environment, the SSL, TLS certificates, user certificates, document code signing, and mobile device certifications, and things that relate to the Internet of Things. A lot of the challenges are faced with accurate discovery, grouping, just the sheer management, renewal, revocation, deployment of certificates. It's a very cumbersome task for one or even a group of individuals, and a shared responsibility often can be a relief in the approach in some of those challenges. Talk a little bit about why the management is important. I think it's of no everyone's aware that hackers and the threats that face individual enterprises and corporations is ever growing. The number of stolen certificates, keys, the number of malicious software threats that corporations face are now, in most cases, hidden behind authenticated and encrypted platforms. So the challenge of managing your encryption resources is ever so much more important. But the question becomes how to manage it effectively. And AppViewX has analyzed these challenges and taken an approach to address certain key concepts within the approach to managing. One of those would be certificate grouping. Looking at the hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of certificate instances that exist across server, code signing, and client-based certificate management and categorizing them, because looking at the collective as a whole becomes unwieldy. So first of all, grouping those certificates into meaningful collections and categories. The private key protection aspect, when they're simply existing within the infrastructure, in most cases, many individuals have access to that infrastructure in varying levels of authorization and access. That exists across NetOps, SecOps, service desks, leadership, a number of contributors, contractors, and the list goes on. So effectively managing the privatization and protection of those keys is of significant importance, so that the access to and authorization to manipulate keys is protected and only made available to the individuals that should have that access and authorization. Monitoring is also extremely important. A number of public services over the recent past have become unavailable for extended periods of time due to unmonitored or unidentified expirations. In many cases, vulnerabilities exist because of weak encryption mechanisms. I know in recent past, PCI compliance had enforced the invalidation of SSL v3 TLS 1.0 mechanisms, and when those service endpoints aren't identified and monitored to be remediated, they go unaddressed and can introduce service disruption. When it comes to that certificate grouping and the private key protection, that goes hand in hand with role-based access controls and auditing. Are the appropriate organizations and administrators able to perform the necessary tasks and functions to maintain proper management of that asset inventory? I'll show in a few moments with a demonstration how the AppViewX platform affords role-based access control and complete inventory auditing. And effective dashboarding and reporting of your asset inventory is also a very critical component. If you're not able to visualize and identify the grouping, categorization of your asset infrastructure, you could be in many cases flying blind or perhaps having a limited scope of awareness. Again, describing some of the challenges, in many cases there's either a limited or no granularity towards role-based access control. It's just all or nothing. And as I was describing a moment ago, it's a daunting task for an individual or group of individuals to assess the needs of those security assets, and the ability to divide and conquer becomes a much more effective solution and approach towards overcoming the challenges. So with granular role-based access control, you can afford appropriate auditing and compliance administration responsibilities across your individual contributors, across your workforce. Another huge challenge is human intervention and the inaccuracies that go along with manually configuring each instance. When you have automated functions with defined policy mechanisms in place that can consistently apply standards to your implementation and deployment structures or workflows, you reduce a lot of the human error and risks associated. And lastly, the insecure private key storage. If it's not within a secured environment such as an HSM or a encrypted at-rest database infrastructure, if it's, say, just compiled within a spreadsheet mechanism in a SharePoint location, well, that's a mechanism that doesn't afford an appropriate level of privacy and security around that management methodology. As far as solutions, within the AppViewX program, it addresses each of those challenges that we've just discussed by allowing you to group certificates and continuously monitor them as they evolve and change. You can then evaluate and validate the entire asset inventory against defined corporate-wide policy or even group-associated policy. And those groupings can be divided into whatever categories are needed by your individual organization or corporation. So it's context specific, whether you wanted it by certificate of issuing authority, by a locally significant parameter set, by application grouping category, by domain, by business unit, whatever the case may be. Centrally storing the information and provisioning of private keys is also addressed in a variety of manners, which are suited to your corporate needs. That could be either locally within the AppViewX platform in the encrypted at-rest database, or offloaded into an HSM platform in which the AppViewX platform integrates with, fetches, retrieves, and interacts with that platform to manage the day-to-day distribution, assignment, revocation, renewal, and interactions with CA instances. And then lastly, delegating the appropriate certificate access and authorizations to team members. That goes along with the role-based access control mechanisms that I was describing a moment ago, so that the responsibilities and maintenance associated with these certificate assets, security assets, can be distributed to those groups and team members that are responsible for the individual maintenance and performance of the IT assets over your distributed workforce. Now, as far as the CERT Plus capabilities, I've just described a bit how that approach to satisfying those challenges comes into play. And this is a slide to depict a bit more of those capabilities. The dynamic inventorying, that's the continuous monitoring in real time of the certificate assets across the entire infrastructure. The ability to group them in a logical format or categorization that is contextually specific to your corporate needs, and the ability to define and then enforce the policies that are relative to either the enterprise-wide or category-specific grouping parameters. The ability to secure the private key storage, and again, that could be resident within the AppViewX database itself or in an external HSM type module. And then making available actionable dashboards. So dashboards that not only allow you the wherewithal to identify potential threats, shortcomings, outlying assets from defined policy, but the ability to remediate those deltas that might be in existence within your infrastructure. Auditing and compliance, the ability to define roles and levels of access to take actionable items, the ability to leverage external authentication mechanisms that are already being used in place as your existing IAM, that's Identity and Access Management policy structure. So where you have existing Active Directory, LDAP, TACACS, Radius authentication mechanisms, the AppViewX platform integrates with those so that you're not redefining the IAM policies. You're simply utilizing those IAM policies to allocate the available access and authorizations to permit that distributed administration task set across your infrastructure. Implementing workflows, and that's the automation aspect of reducing and eliminating the risk to human error. The ability to present to your end users the appropriate administrative workflow tasks so that the overall maintenance of the certificate inventory and assets is distributed and conforms to defined business workflow standards. And lastly, audit each certificate related activity. So with the distribution of rights and permissions comes the necessity to be able to apply oversight and auditing and be able to revert back in some cases, or simply place auditing and permissions oversight along each incremental step. So there would be things like the request process, and then the authorization process, and then the implementation process. And each of those three opportunities could be broken down into a workflow that would be escalated to a oversight or auditing entity, and thus adding additional security to your overall practices. Lastly, I want to talk about the secure private key storage using an HSM platform. So I've mentioned a couple of times the options to either store them locally within the AppViewX database platform, which encrypts that database at rest, or interact with a key management platform such as an HSM, to where the AppViewX platform interacts with that in the overall administration policy that is defined within that corporate structure. And that goes for public, private, all of the key assets. So now I want to jump over to show a live interaction with a demo environment of our latest code release. Janesh, could you take me to the web interface, please? So here we have a demo environment. I'm going to log in as an admin user. Now we appear at a welcome screen with a number of live links to take you to individual management modules. I'm only going to be focusing on certificates. Now another mechanism that you can use to navigate is the module drop-down bar at the top left. I'm going to start off with going to the inventory of certificates that we have in this particular demo environment. And what we're seeing are the 1,441 certificates that have been discovered within the inventory. And you'll see them all listed within a table view there. And we can select a variety of show mechanisms or show categories, or simply do a search. One of the nice features within this summary view is a list of the compliant, expired within 10 days, 30 days, etc. That at a quick glance, you can see some valuable categorizations of your overall inventory and quickly go to those segments. So looking at what's going to expire within the next 10 days across your entire infrastructure, I can simply left click on that object link and it will show within the resulting table those assets that are set to expire within a relative short time frame. Now, as far as grouping and categorization, I'm looking at the current default categorization, and that's just grouping all of what's been pulled into inventory. It can be subcategorized very easily by adding a new group. If I were to select Add New Group, I would apply the appropriate parameters for how I want to segment, and then accept it. I've created one already, and I've called it Test Apps. I have a number of resources that fit the parameter of test apps, and in fact, there are 16 within that. So when I select just that grouping, I'll see only those that are associated. Now again, this might be a context to which you want to apply a grouping by issuer, DigiCert, EGBCA, Entrust, etc. It could be by a product category, widgets.com, content.net, etc. The list goes on and on. So again, we see the number of compliant, expired, non-compliant, revoked, valid. Now, where does this concept of compliancy come in? It comes in the case of policy. So when I go to policy, I have defined, in this particular case, these are all going to be associated to the default policy. As you can see here, I've applied test apps group into default. But if I had some other categorization where I wanted to invoke a policy standard, I would just create a new policy standard, then associate the group to that standard. I'll show you what the policy definitions are within the construct. So you have basically the CSR certificate parameters that you could define, or specific CA details. In this default, I've selected the only valid certificate authorities that I want to associate with this policy are going to be DigiCert, EGBCA, and our own CA issuing instance inherent in the platform AppViewX. As far as certificate types, I've opened up all, but again, this is customized. Do I want wildcard? Do I not? Do I want multi-domain, etc.? Bit length. I've selected everything higher than 1024, well, with the exclusion of 8192. But you can see I've applied the bit length encryption strength as well as RSA as the key exchange type mechanism, and hash function length greater than 256. So as I apply those, that brings the meaning to, going back to the certificate inventory, this particular grouping to where I've defined the policy associated as default. And that's how the compliant, non-compliant association and identifications are made. Now, when I touch really quickly on discovery, how are the certificates discovered? Well, that's very easy. That could be discovered by identifying the server or even the ADC load balancer platform. The ADC stands for Application Domain Controller. That consists of things like A10, Citrix, F5. And if we look at a defined discovery mechanism called ADC discovery, in that case, you're defining the devices that you want to perform the discovery on, and then it retrieves all of the certificates that are currently residing on that platform. I'll go back really quickly and just show you as I click discovery, what goes into the creation of a discovery definition. When we create discovery, we can either do it on a scheduled basis or on demand. You would name it, describe it. It can be performed on an IP range, a subnet, an individual URL. You can upload it directly from, say, a CSV file if you already have a structure and you don't want to manually have to load into the platform. You can, again, manage an ADC like a load balancer, any servers that are under management. You can collect what you have in an existing certificate authority, as well as these other discovery mechanisms. You can specify the port that it would be listening on, so customizing in case you're not listening on standard encryption ports such as 443 and 8443. You can list all ports, and so all of this is customizable to whatever permission sets are available within your existing infrastructure. You know, in many cases, corporations are very aware, mindful of port scans, so it can be broken down to allowing it to do port scans on specific ports, all ports, sets of or groupings of IPs. It can be paced so that you're not getting a false alert instance on a denial of service or not bulk threat, but an aggressive threat attempt to scan your environment. After the discovery, you can identify which certificate grouping you want to place it in. And you can define any rules. Say you do not want to scan a certain range, or sorry, you want to ignore a specific category and parse the overall infrastructure. So discover only this, but not that, out of the defined parameters. So there's a lot of flexibility in the way of discovery to reduce that time and effort. So next I'd like to kind of go in and discuss the reporting capabilities. There are several out-of-the-box dashboard constructs, and these are fully customizable. So if you did not like the out-of-the-box reporting summary for certificates and you wanted to reorganize these widgets to make them more meaningful relative to your corporate environment, that's certainly available. So from this view, we'll see these table widgets that give extremely meaningful information across your entire certificate inventory structure. This first report is broken down by certificate authority, and you'll see red, green, blue as far as the current expiry, pending expiry, and valid certification, broken down by category of CA. Expiry reports by month. So if we were looking at what's coming up next month for expiry or 3 months ahead, we can simply left click on that particular object and we go back to the server certificate inventory view where the table is listing all of those particular vulnerable assets out of the 19 that were shown there. So going back to the dashboard where we had left off, validation status and compliance. Again, the policy compliance defined by the policy definitions that I was illustrating earlier, showing you in a pie chart what is and is not within compliance. And you can simply left click and go back to the table view of all of those certificates that meet that categorization. Reporting by source, you know, where are the certificate assets and what's the current status of those certificate assets based upon their location within your infrastructure. Here we have those that are in the F5 environment, server based on Apache, iPlanet, Fortinet, and so on. Orphan certificates. What's out there that's just sitting but not associated with a particular object? This definitely exists in places like ADCs, where perhaps through the evolution of administration, certificates are deployed to it. When it needs to be re-updated, it's left there. A new certificate is issued, pasted into the device itself, and the virtual server reassigned or associated to the policy, the SSL profile. And then you have an orphaned object. You can easily identify where those exist, go and clean them up with a simple workflow of delete certificates from device, and you've removed all of those expired certificates or orphaned certificates, thus reducing your threat profile or threat surface. Stale certificates, again, which ones are expired, left there, and potentially not necessarily a threat, but better housekeeping. Certificate summary reports, a little bit repetitive from what was shown on the monthly expiry, but here is just a grouping by 10, 30, 90, how much is valid, what is expired currently, what has been revoked, and then a count by issuer. This is often helpful in negotiating pricing, perhaps, with issuers. Hey, I have 95% of my inventory being issued by this particular entity. I think maybe this is grounds for discussing our pricing structure. And lastly, Cipher Suite reporting. I know in a previous life, which by the way, I've worked for 2 different Fortune 500 companies where the AppViewX platform had been deployed. So not only am I affiliated with the company now, but I'm a prior customer and consumer. And it was a huge challenge in remediating the weaker cipher sets, such as SSL v3, TLS 1.0, and 1.1. This platform was extremely helpful in identifying where those assets that did not meet the Cipher Suite compliance and then remediating it. So here we have the list of what each Cipher strength or suite is, and then categorizing the certificates according to those protocols. So up to this point, I've shown a lot of certificate-based reporting management functions. I kind of want to take an application-centric view at this point, showing you a feature called App Vision. Now, when I select App Vision in the application view, I'll see what is dynamically discovered, and this is when you load devices into inventory, the database creates the relational structure based upon application, and it will give you a topology view of that application. I'm going to take an example of something called live wide IP, and this would be relative to whatever applications exist within your domain structure. webapp.mycompany.com, and when you click on that particular object, you would see a structure of the application instance. So we have a wide IP, it's load balanced, it goes to service endpoints, and those service endpoints are serviced with an encryption certificate. I can right click on that certificate instance and go to details, and it will show me the chain of authority structure and where it's applied. So what I'm seeing here, let me zoom out a little bit. What I'm seeing here is the certificate of interest has been issued by the local CA within AppViewX, and has been associated with the F5 ADC virtual services listed here. I can do a variety of functions like download the key, download the certificate, delete the certificate, regenerate, renew, revoke, and that would communicate with the CA that it's bound to perform those functions. Let's say it were to renew, it's about to expire. I would renew, it would open up a workflow. That workflow would complete, and then I could go and push to any number of the devices individually or as a collective whole. So greatly reducing the time of administration and providing a centralized single pane of glass for the administration of that application-centric health and performance as it relates to the certificate. And just to point out once again, this is not something that had to be built. This view, this topology structure of the application, it's something that's dynamically discovered when devices are loaded into inventory. So I'm going to go back to inventory here. And under devices, I'm showing I have this number of ADCs, this number of servers of a varying type, and when they're loaded into the inventory, if permitted, the certificates that reside on them are collected. And the database makes the logical relation discovery of each asset's interaction to build its topology view within the AppVision module. I want to look at one more just to show an even greater, more complex view. So here's an application instance that's been referred to as e-commerce. And as I expand out, get this out of the way really quickly, we'll see that this is a highly distributed application instance. And it runs through firewall gateway instances. So you have a wide IP or fully qualified domain name, e-commerce-services.mybank.com, which is deployed in 3 distinct regional locations. That could be data centers, on-prem, even cloud. You have your associated firewall with details as far as the policy associated with that. It's permitted to come from, to, and set applications, profiles on the target device. So a full definition of the security-related policy associated with that application instance, and down to the F5, its pool members, and associated certificates. Again, if I right-click on a certificate associated with the application instance, select Details, I can see the chain of authority. It was issued by this root CA, has this chain, and the valid CERT and key that has been discovered from the F5 device, shown that it was issued by the local CA, and applied to 2 different F5 LTM instances, virtual service instances. And you would see that I can push to the particular device group or individual devices. And when a work function, this is a work request, request number 19, has been deployed, if there were an issue with it, you can singly click rollback and reverse the workflow function. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on is going to be logging. Actually, it's the second to last because I'll touch on alert in just a moment. So here we have all alerts, or sorry, all logs. We have audit, self-audit. That would mean what the user that has logged in under this particular instance has performed, certificate related, ADC platform, the AppViewX system itself, any collection of syslogs, SSH as well. focusing on the topic of interest, which is certificate, so I could see what's going on with certificate related to an application instance. So in this case, the ecom, actually the ecom exists in several of the definitions. This one happens to refer to ecom service Middle East. It's showing you that the admin bound that particular certificate. The real key value here is it's showing you which user performed that operation at which time on which device and to which object. So as far as auditing and compliance and oversight, the ability to determine what was done, when, on what, and by whom is fully discoverable. Finally, alerts. You can generate alerts based upon certificate events, fully customizable. I'll go to settings, walk through a use case scenario. It could be something like expiry. I want to notify via email or SNMP trap that an expiry is about to occur in 30 days. I would select event type, certificate expiry. Let's say that this is critical. I could associate it to the server certificate category. And I would set the timer for 30 days. I could select email and SNMP, send it to or to a destination SNMP listener, hit add, and we have a valid alert notification for that particular event. So the last thing that I'll highlight is going to be the role-based access control. I've mentioned it a few times, and describing how to distribute responsibilities across your human resources so that you can maintain a more granular administrative approach can be facilitated through the role-based access control. I did mention that the authentication to the platform, and that's both API and web user base, can be administered by configuring the external authentication mechanism. And you'd see that LDAP exists, TACACS, Radius, SAML, and you can even specify the order if you use a variety of AAA mechanisms through which it would have to check. So once a user is authenticated, how do you define their authorizations? Well, those are broken up into categories. As far as the role is defined, that's the authentication mechanism. You could define, and this would conform to the existing IAM parameters within your organization. So let's call them NetOps, SecOps, DevOps, security, PKI admin, something like that. So whatever LDAP or Active Directory grouping structure is already in existence, it would be identified in this role-based definition here. So in an example of I've defined something which exists already called ops team at mycompany.com, I would assign that particular role with authorization functions or authorized functions. Now, all of them are selected here, but let's say that you wanted to customize to the extent of this is going to be a CERT administrative team. So I could, remove all functions except for CERT. Now, I could either let them have all of CERT or only a portion of CERT. Let's say that the only responsibility for this role is related to server certificate actions. They can download a CSR, issue a regenerate, renew, reissue, submit function. So I could reduce it to just those particular functions and then save that role. So that's the authorized functions. That's what they can do. Now the next important aspect is what can you perform those functions on? So then you associate the defined role with resources. So here we're going to say that there is a resource category called resource category 1. And I'm going to allow that resource category 1 to perform the stated functions from the role definition on only, let's say, read-write of test apps. Everything else they can read. So I'll be able to look at what the certificate inventory is, where it's currently applied, what its cipher mechanisms are, its key strength, its algorithms, its protocol structure, but I won't be able to do anything with it. I won't be able to write to it. But let's say that there's a specific group of applications, CA-issued entities, etc., a specific category of resources and assets that you want them to take action on. You can allocate just that action and access control based on that. And finally, there's provisioning workflow. Again, even broken down, I was describing previously, you'd have stopgaps to where there's request, there's approve, and implement. Well, those are broken down in this particular provisioning workflow radio checkbox sequence of I would allow you to push but not roll back, implement, or perhaps request or approve. Again, each of those are broken down in this particular configuration parameter screen. So once you have defined those, save, and that associates the resources that the defined role can perform the role definition actions on. If you want to utilize local authentication, those are defined as user groups and even defining individual users. So with user groups, you're defining local authentication parameters or user group structures, and then in individual users, you're identifying individual local authenticated users. So that completes the presentation for the demo portion. Janice, could you take us back to the slide view, please? Thank you, sir. Oops. So I've already kind of described a few of the customer use case or case studies. We've had much success in financial services and even service providers, that be service providers like cable service providers, a number of insurance companies, and utility companies. But just to detail some of the case studies, this slide is just demonstrating some of our valued clients that have utilized the CERT Plus management tool to improve their overall certificate management capabilities and reduce their threat surface. So that brings us to the end of the demonstration and the slide view. I'd like to open up to any questions. If you wouldn't mind just placing them into the chat panel, I'd be happy to address any questions, concerns, or feedback. So no thoughts? Anyone care to share anything?
Hey Glenn, so we have one question here. Can we manage a certificate's life cycle, such as creating a CSR or something like that?
Yes, absolutely. So if we could go back to the demo environment, I'll quickly show where the CSR creation. So within the certificate inventory, you can generate CSRs manually. So if you have a new deployment, and that can also be issued through a workflow, and this would be an out-of-the-box workflow, which are accessible under requests. Here we have the summary view. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Certificate new request. You would generate the details of the CSR within that certificate request and submit from that point. You could also do that from the certificate inventory view under generate CSR manually. One other important thing to point out is when generating there's a difference between renew and reissue. Renew would be using the existing CSR associated with the key. Reissue would be redefining the CSR parameters. And so there's an important distinguishment in that option selection. If you had noticed from the view where I was showing you a particular certificate chain, which I'm going to go back to something like let's see, I'll select this one here, which has a DigiCert association. I could reissue it, in which case I would have the opportunity to modify the CSR parameters or simply renew, and it would use the existing. Did that answer the question?
Yes, Glenn.
Okay. Any other feedback, thoughts?
I think there are no more questions, Glenn. So great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. As mentioned earlier, if you'd like to have a hands-on experience with our product, please register for a free trial at the given link. And for more information on our other solutions, please visit us at www.appvux.com or mail us your queries at info@appvux.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.